Everyone knows that feeling, wanting to experience more stories, but struggling to find the time. That's where Audible changes everything. With over 1 million audiobooks and Audible originals, there's a story waiting to spark anyone's imagination. Take The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley, the gripping psychological thriller that's keeping listeners on the edge of their seats. Imagine unraveling its mysteries during your morning commute, or losing yourself in its twists and turns while doing household chores. That's the magic of Audible. It transforms daily routines into opportunities for thrilling discoveries. The best part? Members get access to thousands of included titles, with new content added regularly. From bestsellers to hidden gems, every genre imaginable is at their fingertips. And with one easy-to-use app, switching between favorites or discovering new passions has never been simpler. There's more to imagine when you listen. Start a free 30-day Audible trial and get your first audiobook free at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
Now it's time for Inspirational Women and my guest, Naomi Berger, a psychotherapist and author who brings a unique perspective to her new book, the memoir, The Bipolar Therapist, A Journey from Madness to Love and Meaning. It takes courage to be this vulnerable, and it's an incredible gift to us to have these insights for our own health, for awareness for those we love. Marcia Naomi Berger, good morning, and thank you so greatly for being with us today.
Oh, good morning. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, I am also very pleased that we have this opportunity for a conversation because we're going to be focusing on a conversation about mental illness, mental health, mental illness. It goes around in a circle in a way. And because it's always been part of our world, part of our society, but it seems to be so much more prevalent, if you will, right now. And there's compassion, and then there's spitefulness that goes on. And, whether we call this Mental Health Awareness Month or it should be Mental Health Awareness Year, that we're constantly aware of this. So I want to have you share with us some insights from your own perspectives, from your work, from your life, as to, that in general, about what our attitude is toward persons who are dealing with a mental health issue.
Yes, and I think you understand how terrible the stigma is, and how it's probably, in my own experience, I'll say that probably the worst part of my journey from being mentally ill with bipolar disorder, and back when I was in my very late 20s and early 30s, it was time that it was prominent in my life, and the stigma was definitely the worst part. I worked I'm a therapist, a psychotherapist and a licensed clinical social worker. I was working with other therapists at an alcoholism treatment center in San Francisco when I had my first manic episode, and a couple more in the next year and a half. And people are sometimes surprised if I tell them that other therapists stigmatized me and harassed me and were treated me like a non-person. But that was definitely the worst part of having it. When you're manic, it can be fun. You're getting this very expansive, I can do anything, and I'm so smart kind of a mood, and may have some delusions about what's going to be happening in your life, which I did. And then it gets to a point where it becomes kind of frightening for one reason or another. That's hard, but like I said, the worst part is the stigma.
And it is shocking to think that other therapists, your coworkers, would have that kind of an attitude about it. Don't we feel that as a therapist, we have someone with compassion and understanding and being open-minded?
Probably, as long as they're not personally feeling threatened by what's going on. I wondered if part of their discomfort with me was I was a very respected therapist. I was giving clinical supervision to other therapists, for my specialty had become working with couples and families, and I was training other people. So somebody like me could flip out and go from, a little neurosis is okay, but not psychosis. Somebody like me could do that. Maybe that meant that they too might cross the line sometime. That's my theory about what makes them so uncomfortable and act so crassly or rudely.
Well, that certainly makes sense. But then we transfer that just to society in general. And, tragically, we see so many persons on our streets these days, or at least here in Seattle, we do, that are, I believe, suffering from mental illness. And yet there's either just ignoring them as though the person doesn't exist, or I think that I have not seen this happen, but I think that there are ways that there are other individuals who prey on them or pick on them and make their life miserable. So why do we do that just generally in society?
I think it probably is that people feel really uncomfortable about it.
Yeah.
And whether there might be a there, but for the grace of God go I kind of feeling. I think I sometimes have that in that kind of a situation, a mixture of compassion and also some maybe you don't know what to expect, or the vulnerability that you feel around people whose behavior may be unpredictable.
As you were saying, other therapists feeling, well, were they going to maybe, quote, flip out sometime that, is it that kind of precarious? And is it like that? I know a little bit of, very little bit, but there, with your grandmother, she had a mental illness. I'm not sure that your mother did, but I mean, she was dealing with trauma, and then you have the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So is there, that sense of feeling that's been in my history, it's going to happen to me? Or is that not the way it works?
Well, I guess it can work different ways. There's a lot of people believe that this is a genetic or biological thing, and then in my experience, as a social worker, trained social worker, I tend to give a lot of credence to the environment. And my maternal grandmother was a poor immigrant who didn't speak English and was abandoned by her husband when she was pregnant with my mother. So did she get institutionalized because she couldn't function and didn't have money and didn't have the language and didn't have the supports, and they didn't have the kind of medications that they have now? Or would it have happened anyway? I don't know. Who knows?
Yes.
I think we still have a lot to learn about lots of aspects of mental illness. The good news is that now there is a lot more treatment for it that is successful than there used to be.
That is really great news. I'm going to just make a slight comment back to what you were saying about your grandmother. Because while I was going to university, I worked at a mental hospital during summers. So this was during the late 60s, early 70s, when mental hospitals still existed. And what was interesting, I was on a geriatric ward that was women. And interestingly for me, many of the women were there because they'd gone through some emotional trauma. A husband left them or a boyfriend jilted them, and they ended up here. And I thought that was just astounding. So that just came to mind as you talked about your grandmother and what happened, and and in her case, not even having the language to be able to express herself. So it almost seems targeted with what happened in the past.
It does. Yeah, it does. I mean, it really, I'm very interested in what you just said, that apparently it is very common when it's a unhappy kind of ending of a relationship.
Yes.
And that becomes traumatic and can push some people over the edge.
Right. So in your case then, you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Help us understand what bipolar is. I think I have a vague notion, but it would be good that we're all on the same page.
Okay, and there are different variations of bipolar, but the quick definition would be extremes in moods. In some cases, it's a series of manic episodes. It's often thought bipolar is often thought of as ups and downs of manic, feeling like on top of the world and having great powers and lots of fascinating ideas that there's no way they're going to all be able to come to fruition. And then a period of great despair, and some people, God forbid, become suicidal. Okay. So I think now I keep changing the terminology. When I was going through the rough times, it was called manic depression. And you might have heard that when you worked in a mental hospital. Sometime, this is in my book, I forgot exactly what year, but I think approximately 1980 or so, they changed it to bipolar. And then I remember hearing about unipolar, and I thought, oh, that sounds like me, manic and then stable and then manic and then stable. But now they call it bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. And bipolar 1 is more like me, where frequently there isn't a depression, but there's the mania. And bipolar 2 has both mania and the depression. I don't know if there's one that's unipolar depression. I think they just probably use the diagnosis of depression for that. But don't quote me on that. And let's see, was there more to that I wanted to say? Oh, yes, that the cycles can vary. Some people might cycle very, very often, maybe within days or weeks or within months, not as often. For me, my first episode happened in 1974. And then the next one was just about a year later. And then the next one was 6 months later. And that was when I finally agreed to take medication. And everything changed after that.
For the better.
Oh, definitely. Definitely for the better. Right. I kept advancing in my career. One reason I like to tell my story, which is a very hard one to tell because it does bring up something like trauma in the past, the stigma, the kind of treatment that I experienced from some people when I wrote about it in my book, The Bipolar Therapist. It's like kind of cathartic to write about it, but also like, I went through all this. So what was the question I'm answering now? I'm sorry, I lost my track.
Well, let me, though, as you mentioned, what it was like having to kind of bring that all up so that you could write about it. I want to say thank you. I feel... I am sorry that it had to stir up so much pain again, but my hope, and I'm trusting that this is going to be beneficial for all of us, whether we are dealing with something similar and if we're not, well, be thankful and maybe learn some compassion as to how to treat people more kindly and humanely.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the motivation for my publishing the book. And I did have a lot of ups and downs about should I do this or should I not publish this book. And I finally, someone who a mentor for me said, you should definitely publish it because it will help a lot of people. Right. And that did it. Then I was committed.
And I hope that you are also feeling some of that help yourself or feeling goodness about it, and that you're not having, any kind of attacks or negative comments or being undermined by colleagues as you had been in the past.
Right. And that, that's writing the book and publicizing the book opens me up. So yes, I do have fears, and I do have, my goal is, which I hope I can accomplish at least most of the time. If somebody is judging me negatively about this, then I would like to view it as their problem, not mine. And this is a lot of why I wrote the book, is to show that we should be viewed as much more than our diagnosis. Okay. We're all complex human beings. We all have strengths and gifts that we can offer to the world. And it's dehumanizing to just reduce somebody to a diagnosis and not see the full picture of who they are and who they can be. And, my story certainly shows the full picture of me. I mean, it shows my relationships, it shows my career. It shows Actually, I don't like to give away too much in the book, but I recovered basically. I guess that's the thing. It's hard not to want to explain that, but I think people want to know that there is hope and that some people do recover from a mental illness. Not everybody, but I think the vast majority of people can manage a mental illness, and that's how they get along with it. Even if it's not a total recovery without medication, they can still live a very full life while taking medication. And it's a matter of finding the right medication that has no side effects or no difficult ones.
And that's what you were saying. It was after the third episode, right?
Was the third, because a very common happening when we are treated as mentally ill, or I didn't get a diagnosis as far as I know from the first hospitalization. The second one, I was told definitely. They gave me the MMPI test, and the psychologist said you're definitely test manic depressive. You should start taking lithium, which was the drug of choice back then for manic depression. You should start taking lithium right away, or your career will be ruined. I didn't believe him. I thought it was a fluke. Both times I got hospitalized, I was just under stress and da, da, da. And at the third time, I had wonderful friends who talked to the psychiatrist at the hospital. This was a different hospital. And I liked him. I trusted him, and I trusted my friends who were very loving and urged me to take lithium, and I did. So, but there's a denial there going. Nobody wants to, especially because of all the stigma. Nobody wants to say, "Oh, yes, I have a diagnosis and I'm mentally ill." Yes. So denial is very common.
And lithium, was that controversial? Were there?
That's a very good question, because it was not controversial back then. It was the drug of choice, and it happened to work just wonderfully for me. But over time, too many people were experiencing terrible side effects, including damage to kidneys. I know somebody whose husband has the bipolar diagnosis. He is on kidney dialysis after a long time on lithium. I was very fortunate. I'm kind of a sensitive biological system, I think, because when I first started taking the lithium, I remember talking to one of my dear friends, Eileen, and she said, "Well, why don't you talk to your doctor? Maybe you could take less." So I talked to my psychiatrist, and he reduced it to 1/3 of what I'd been taking, and it worked fine. It was half of the recommended so-called therapeutic dose, around half of the low end, and it worked fine for me. So I did experience 0 side effects, and lucky me. Now they don't routinely prescribe lithium because of the problems, and there are other drugs that they do instead, and sometimes they have to experiment to get the right drug or the right combination for each particular person.
Sure. I sometimes, and I don't know that it would be with a bipolar diagnosis, but with some, certainly with depression, people are prescribed medications and they find that they just can't stay on the medication. There's some adverse effect, and how does one deal with that? That if it's going to be beneficial, if it's going to help you, to encourage people to stay on it.
It's a really, really important topic. After I left the Alcoholism Treatment Center, where I worked and was stigmatized, I learned not to tell anybody about my diagnosis or that I was taking medication for it. So I got recruited to work on, ready for this, a psychiatric ward. Okay, so I was a senior psychiatric social worker, earned the respect, again, of my colleagues there, and didn't tell anybody. And I watched the patients going through, we called it the revolving door. They would come in and they would get on medication and they would be fine, and they would leave and they would discontinue their medication because it made them feel dizzy or fuzzy or some other symptoms people would get from medication. And then they'd be back over and over. Yeah. I think it does help if the way I was talked to by my friends in a kind, loving, caring way. And if they have people outside of the hospital who will relate to them that way, I think that's more likely to be helpful than just a stern warning.
Right. So,
and
yes.
excuse me, and side effects, they should be discussing them with the person who prescribes them, like I did also. And maybe they can be reduced or they can change. There can be a lot of experimenting. You try one thing, if it doesn't work, try something else.
Yes.
But don't just on your own discontinue taking anything. Because I did end up going off lithium and staying off it, I caution people, do not do this without medical advice and supervision. I went off it because my husband and I was trying to get pregnant, and my doctor said you should get off lithium because it can harm a fetus. So it was going to be a 2-week experiment to see if I could handle it. And it turned out I was petrified because you know what happened to me before.
Yes.
I never had to go back on it. I was fine without it.
So, and that can happen. So that there's the hope. There's some of the hope. There's lots of hope in the story, but to realize that is to work with someone that you trust.
Yes.
And communicate. And really bring back any kind of feelings that you're having that might feel adverse so that you can get that tweaked.
Definitely. And keep that medical supervision going. If the person agrees to try you off your medication, you still need to be monitored.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
For a long time.
Yeah.
I was in therapy with this psychiatrist, so he was seeing me every week for quite a while after I was off the lithium.
Right. Now, there might be some of the crisis in our country right now is that we are really short on the medical professionals in this field, that there are enough people available, enough therapists, enough counselors to see people who are dealing with mental health issues.
Yeah, that might depend on where you live. I happen to live in Marin County, California. Somebody made a joke where here there's a psychiatrist for every person, maybe 2 psychiatrists. So it does depend on where you live. And I have heard, though, that in some areas there is a great shortage. However, if a psychiatrist needs to be there for the medication, a therapist can be like me, somebody with a master's degree and a license to practice therapy. Because they've studied social work and marriage and family therapy, and have learned about different. My first placement as a graduate student, my first we could call it an internship, was at a VA hospital's outpatient mental health clinic. So my first patient that I ever saw in graduate school was diagnosed schizophrenic. So I'm saying this because I know that if you get social worker or another kind of therapist who is not an MD, psychiatrist, with the right kind of training, as long as there's somebody who can take care of the medication, the therapy can continue to happen. And I think that there are enough well-trained people just about anywhere. Unless you're like a hermit living in a shack 20 miles from anybody.
Right. So a therapist would perhaps be aware that a person could benefit from medication and would refer them to a medical person or a doctor. Yes. So good to know that these things need to happen. And it sounds, again, like you said, you had a good support network. Family, friends need to support individuals who are going through a mental episode. If someone was dealing with cancer, with heart disease, would we just abandon them? We wouldn't. I don't think we would. And so we need to, and I think for whatever reason, maybe you have some insight, why do we treat mental illness this way?
Well, I think it does have a lot to do with people's discomfort with the unpredictable behavior. And there can be a lot of fear, maybe. Is this person going to hurt me? Or is this person going to blurt out something I don't want them to say about me or to me? So it's a lot of the fear ends up getting acted out in keeping a distance from the people or God forbid, stigmatizing them.
Right, right.
It's really dehumanizing. It's dehumanizing. And my dream is for people who have mental health issues to receive the same kind of compassion and understanding that people with physical health issues experience.
Yes, absolutely. And part of that comes, of course, with just the general public, all of us, becoming more informed and getting over the fear. Could there be a violent episode? I suppose there could be.
It does happen. It can happen. Right. Yeah. Oh, gosh. I'm thinking about a patient I had at San Francisco General. She was a revolving door. She kept coming back. And I was contacted one time because she was on the streets, where she was a lot in San Francisco, where there are a lot of unusual behaving people on the street in San Francisco. So they can, maybe Seattle too, maybe they can be ignored. But apparently she grabbed a cane from a blind man, and she just grabbed it and took it away from him. It was a violent act. Okay. And so that person's social worker decided, the blind person, to be an advocate and make a big thing about it, and maybe prosecute the client, the patient in general, so these things can happen. And I think I must have gotten, it was a long time ago, but I must have gotten involved enough to explain that she was mentally ill, and it wasn't really like she was in her right mind when she did it. And I could say more about her because she was very, very interesting, but I think you have other questions for me.
Well, and actually that I think points to your book, The Bipolar Therapist, so that as someone who's had the experience of that diagnosis, bipolar, and being a therapist, do you feel that brings that kind of compassion and more understanding in your dealings with clients, with patients?
Yeah, I was very aware of that when I worked on the psych ward at San Francisco General Hospital, because of my experience, every time I was in the hospital, I wanted to get out as fast as I can. I wanted to get back to my life, back to my work. I always liked my work. Wanted to get back there, my colleagues, and when I wasn't being harassed or didn't expect to be. So I had this attitude where I would get people out faster, get them diagnosed, medicated, discharge plan, and they're out. Okay. So I ended up having to serve more patients, because once you get one out, you get another one. But that did affect the allotted work. I didn't want them to have to go through any more hospitalization time than was really necessary. And it is easy to just kind of relax and let people stay. But I didn't think it was necessary or to stay any longer than until got medicated, discharge plan, out.
And get on with your life, just as you were doing for yourself.
Right.
Get that diagnosis, find the solutions, and get on with it. If a person has a cancer diagnosis, you go for the treatments, you take the medication, and you do what you can in your life when you have the energy, or you just keep going. So treating it in sort of that same vein.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Well, again, Naomi, I think it's just so incredibly courageous of you to do this. I'm glad you listened to those who were encouraging you to write the book and to share it, to have the light of day, because it's we need to really be talking about mental health issues in a very constructive way to support individuals. I mean, it's just tragic when they don't get the support that they need, and lives are lost. It impacts all of us, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. So again, I'm so appreciative that you've done that. So the book, The Bipolar Therapist, is of course available through all of our favorite book sources, right?
Yes, it's available at all the regular places. If it's not in your bookstore, you can ask for it. It's certainly available online with bookshop.org if you like to support independent bookstores and, of course, on Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
And
I hope it'll be in lots of libraries and people can ask the library to get it if they don't have it.
good point. So we better make a check on that. And I do like to encourage the support of our local bookstores. So if it's not there, certainly give them the title and ask them to order it. Right?
Right.
And as for people being able to locate you on this World Wide Web, your full name gets us there.
Yeah, that's the easy way if you don't mind spelling my name. It's Marcia, Marcia, Naomi, Naomi, and Berger is BERGER.com.
Great. So many ways then, get the book, find the website, get the information, and we do our part to become more informed, to become better citizens and support those who are struggling. And Naomi, again, my deepest gratitude that you are doing this work and you are so passionate about it.
Thank you so much, Kate.
And thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
That brings us to the end of a very full hour of Inspirational Women with Naomi Berger and Sunday Morning Magazine with Cy Montgomery. Remember to watch the National Geographic special, Secrets of the Octopus. I'm Kate Daniels, your host, and I greatly appreciate your sharing this hour with me and these special guests. For details you might have missed or information you'd like to know, please just send me an email, kated@warm1069.com, and I will get right back to you. Also, if you'd like to listen again or share these important stories with your family and friends, find the podcast on our Warm 1069 webpage. Just click on the Listen tab, then Podcasts, then either of the show names, and then look for the guest names. I now wish you and your family a day of realizing the preciousness of life, treating each other with this awareness, and consider the lives of the countless men and women who have sacrificed theirs for us. Have a week of the same, and then please plan to join me again next weekend for another hour of Sunday Morning Magazine and Inspirational Women on Warm 1069. Good morning.